There are shadows in history so deep, so persistent, they refuse to fade with time. These are the unsolved mysteries of espionage cases where spies, codes, and clandestine operations left behind riddles that still taunt us today. Imagine a world where documents vanish without a trace, where agents operate under layers of deception so thick even their true allegiances remain unknown. This isn't fiction. This is the real, pulse-quickening realm of historical espionage where some secrets were buried so well they might never see the light. For centuries, spies have moved like ghosts through the corridors of power, their actions shaping wars, toppling governments, and rewriting the fates of nations. Yet some of their most daring missions ended not with a bang, but with a whisper vanishing into the fog of history, leaving behind only questions. Who was behind that cryptic message intercepted during the Cold War? What really happened to the double agent who disappeared without a trace? These aren't just footnotes in a history book. They're tantalizing gaps in our understanding, puzzles waiting to be pieced together by those brave enough to delve into the darkness. That's exactly what we're about to do. Over the course of this journey, we'll uncover 25 of history's most enigmatic espionage cases, stories of betrayal, ingenuity, and sheer audacity that defy explanation. From vanished codebreakers to stolen secrets that vanished into thin air, each tale is a window into a world where nothing is as it seems. So if you've ever wondered what it's like to stare into the abyss of the unknown, to chase leads that dead end into silence, you're in the right place. Because history's greatest spy mysteries aren't just about the past. They're about the thrill of the unsolved, the lure of the untold, and the possibility that somewhere out there, the truth is still waiting to be found. She danced through the shadows of history, a woman wrapped in as much mystery as the veils she wore on stage. Mata Hari, born Margaretha Zell, was more than just a performer. She was a femme fatale whose name became synonymous with espionage. But was she really a spy or simply a victim of wartime hysteria? The truth remains as elusive as the woman herself. Her story begins in the early 20th century when she captivated Paris with exotic dances and a persona crafted from the imagined mystique of the East. Men in high places were drawn to her, and soon whispers followed. When World War I erupted, her connections to powerful figures across Europe made her a target. French intelligence suspected her of passing secrets to the Germans, but evidence was thin, mostly circumstantial at best. Yet in 1917, she was arrested, tried, and executed by firing squad. The speed of her conviction sent shockwaves through Europe. Was this justice or a rush to condemn a woman whose only crime was being too enigmatic, too uncontainable for the rigid world of war? Decades later, historians still debate her true role. Some argue she was nothing more than a scapegoat, a distraction from France's intelligence failures. Others point to intercepted telegrams hinting at coded messages, but here's what we know for certain. The case against her was flimsy, built on rumor and fear. No decisive proof ever surfaced, and many files related to her trial remain classified even today. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't whether she was guilty, but why she was chosen to pay the price. Was it because she was a woman who dared to live freely in a time when women weren't supposed to have power? Or was there something deeper, some truth lost to history? Mata Hari's fate is a warning, a reminder that in the world of spies, sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the secrets you keep, but the stories others tell about you. The most dangerous secrets are the ones never spoken aloud, the names buried so deep, even history struggles to unearth them. Among the most notorious betrayals of the 20th century, the Cambridge spy ring stands out not just for its audacity, but for the unsettling possibility that we still don't know the full story. 5 men, Kim Philby, Guy Burgess, Donald MacLean, Anthony Blunt, and John Cairncross, infiltrated the highest levels of British intelligence, funneling secrets to Moscow for decades. But what if there was a sixth? Kim Philby, the charming, ruthless mastermind of the group, once hinted at another recruit during his defection to the Soviet Union. Soviet archives later revealed vague references to an unidentified agent codenamed Basil, who allegedly operated alongside the five, yet no concrete evidence has ever surfaced. Was Basil a fabrication, a smokescreen to protect someone still hidden? Or is there a name, perhaps a respected diplomat, a quiet academic, or even an intelligence officer, still waiting to be exposed? The depth of the Cambridge Five's infiltration was staggering. Philby rose to head counterintelligence against the Soviets while working for them. Burgess and McLean caused international scandals when they fled to Moscow. Blunt, the art historian, secretly passed classified documents for years, but the gaps in their known activities fuel speculation. Certain leaks don't neatly align with their movements, and some Soviet handlers spoke of additional contact. Why does this mystery endure? Because it strikes at the heart of trust itself. If a sixth man existed, he wasn't just a traitor, he was a ghost slipping through the cracks of history. And in the shadowy world of espionage, the most terrifying thought isn't the enemies you know. It's the ones you never saw coming. Raoul Wallenberg stepped off the streets of Budapest and into history with nothing but a typewriter and a courage that defied the Nazis. By 1944, Hungary had become a slaughterhouse for Jewish families, but this young Swedish diplomat turned his office into a lifeline. Armed with hastily printed protective passports, he pulled thousands from deportation trains, sheltered them in safe houses, and even confronted German soldiers face to face, once climbing onto a death train's roof to shove papers through the slats. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he vanished. In January 1945, with Soviet forces closing in on Budapest, Wallenberg was last seen being escorted by Red Army officers. The Soviets claimed he died in prison 2 years later, but the evidence was flimsy, a signature forged, a death certificate backdated, and witnesses who later recanted. For decades, survivors and investigators chased whispers. Sightings in Siberian labor camps coded messages from prisoners, even a nameless inmate matching his description in a psychiatric hospital as late as the 1980s. Theories abound. Some believe he was executed for knowing too much about Stalin's post-war plans. Others insist he was kept alive as a bargaining chip, his knowledge of Nazi atrocities making him valuable. Recent digs at a Moscow prison uncovered human remains, but DNA tests proved inconclusive. The darkest possibility that his disappearance wasn't an accident, it was a message. Wallenberg had witnessed Soviet brutality firsthand during the occupation of Budapest. If he'd talked, he could have exposed their crimes alongside Germany's. What makes his case endure isn't just the mystery, it's the painful irony. The man who outmaneuvered the Gestapo couldn't escape the system he trusted to liberate Hungary. Even now, Sweden and Russia clash over declassified files, while aging Holocaust survivors still ask one unbearable question. After saving so many, why couldn't anyone save him? The Zodiac Killer's reign of terror in the late 1960s left behind more than just bodies. It left a trail of ciphers so complex, they seemed ripped from a spy thriller. But what if the codes weren't just the work of a twisted mind, but the fingerprints of someone trained in clandestine communication? Among the many theories swirling around America's most infamous unidentified serial killer, one stands out for its chilling plausibility: that the Zodiac wasn't just a murderer, but a rogue operative using skills honed in the shadow war of the Cold War. Examine the evidence. The Zodiac's first cipher, mailed to newspapers in 1969, stumped cryptanalysts at the National Security Agency for over 50 years. When finally cracked in 2020, it revealed not just taunts, but a structure mirroring Soviet spycraft techniques: precise, layered, and designed to resist casual decryption. His later missives included references to military-grade encryption methods and even a bizarre claim about collecting slaves for the afterlife. a phrase some linguists argue echoes terminology used in psychological operations manuals of the era. Then there's the timing. The killings peaked during the height of Cold War paranoia, when thousands of intelligence personnel were being quietly reassigned or discharged amidst budget cuts and bureaucratic purges. Could the Zodiac have been one of them? Former FBI behavioral analysts point to his meticulous planning, the way he disappeared after attacks without leaving forensic traces, his ability to manipulate media attention, all hallmarks of someone trained in tradecraft. Even his choice of targets, often near military bases like Vallejo and Presidio, fuels speculation about someone exploiting knowledge of security protocols. But the most haunting clue might be what wasn't there. In 1974, the Zodiac sent a letter referencing the kidnapping of Patricia Hearst by the Symbionese Liberation Army, a group later revealed to have ties to radicalized intelligence assets. The killer's detailed knowledge of the case, delivered before most details were public, suggested insider awareness. Combine that with his sudden silence after the mid-70s, coinciding with mass declassifications of CIA programs, and a disturbing pattern emerges. Of course, skeptics argue this is all circumstantial, that the Zodiac was simply a criminal genius mimicking what he'd read in pulp novels, yet the puzzle remains incomplete. Decades later, 3 of his ciphers stay unsolved, their contents possibly holding the final answer. Was this the work of a madman, or something far more calculated, a ghost from the intelligence world who turned his skills against the very society he'd once been trained to protect? Deep in the jungles of the Philippines, a fortune in gold, jewels, and priceless artifacts supposedly lies buried, not just lost, but deliberately hidden with the precision of a military operation. This is the legend of Yamashita's gold, a treasure rumored to have been amassed by Japanese forces during World War II and concealed by General Tomoyuki Yamashita himself. But what if the real story isn't just about stolen riches, but about the shadowy network of spies and collaborators who made the loot vanish? The timeline is suspiciously precise. In the final months of the war, as American forces closed in, Japanese officers allegedly orchestrated a massive operation to hide their plunder across the Philippines. Tunnels were blasted into mountainsides, caves were sealed with explosives, and prisoners of war were reportedly executed to protect the locations. Yet the most compelling detail isn't the treasure, it's the involvement of intelligence operatives. Witnesses described men in civilian clothes directing the burials, some speaking fluent English or Filipino, suggesting a web of double agents and local informants. Post-war chaos only deepened the mystery. American intelligence documents from the period reference intercepted messages about wealth transfers and special deposits, but the trail goes cold after 1945. Even stranger, key figures connected to the treasure, like a Japanese intelligence officer named Prince Takedo, disappeared without a trace, their fates scrubbed from records. Meanwhile, former OSS agents, including a young lawyer named Edward Lansdale, later admitted to hunting for the gold, hinting that the search was more than just rumor. The most tantalizing theory, that the treasure wasn't just hidden, it was laundered. Declassified files reveal that recovered gold bars were funneled into covert Cold War operations, possibly funding anti-communist efforts in Asia. Some researchers point to the Black Eagle Trust, an alleged slush fund used by intelligence agencies, as the final destination for Yamashita's loot, but without concrete proof, the line between fact and conspiracy blurs. To this day, treasure hunters comb the Philippines armed with old maps and metal detectors. A few have turned up artifacts, but the bulk remains missing, if it ever existed at all. The real enigma isn't the gold, it's the silence. Why were so many documents destroyed? Why do witnesses still refuse to talk decades later, and whose secrets would still be worth protecting long after the war ended? The answer might lie not in the jungle, but in the unspoken alliances between spies, soldiers, and the fortunes they swore to keep buried. For over 300 years, one name has haunted French history, not spoken in whispers but hidden behind cold, unforgiving metal. The man in the Iron Mask, a prisoner of Louis XIV, remains one of history's most enigmatic figures. But who was he? A fallen spy, a disgraced noble, or something far more explosive, a secret so dangerous it had to be locked away beneath steel? The facts are sparse yet tantalizing. Imprisoned in the late 17th century, the masked man was transferred between fortresses guarded by men sworn to silence. His identity was so volatile, even his jailers were forbidden to see his face. Historical records mention only his death in 1703, buried under a false name. But the mystery truly begins with the theories. One thread suggests he was a spy caught in the web of France's labyrinthine court politics. Diplomatic letters from the era reference captured agents, and some scholars point to Ercole Mattioli, an Italian diplomat who double-crossed Louis in a secret land deal. But if Mattioli was the prisoner, why the extreme secrecy? Spies were usually executed, not hidden. Then there's the royal connection. Voltaire himself speculated the mask concealed Louis' illegitimate older brother, a threat to the Sun King's legitimacy. Others propose he was the king's twin, a living challenge to divine right. Imagine the scandal, an identical face behind bars while the monarch reigned. Yet palace records show no gaps in the royal lineage, leaving this theory in the realm of tantalizing fiction. The darkest possibility that the mask wasn't just hiding a man, but a truth capable of unraveling the monarchy. In 1965, a researcher uncovered coded letters suggesting the prisoner was linked to a failed coup against Louis. If true, his existence would have been a constant reminder of the crown's vulnerability, a ghost kept alive to serve as a warning. Modern forensics offer little help. The Bastille's archives were destroyed in the Revolution, and the few surviving documents are maddeningly vague. Even the famous Iron Mask was likely velvet, a detail exaggerated by later storytellers. But perhaps the most telling clue is the cost. Historical accounts note the prisoner's upkeep was astronomical: fine meals, a personal valet. This wasn't just any captive. He was someone worth the expense of forgetting. So why does this mystery endure? Because it's more than a historical puzzle. It's a window into the absolute power of kings, where a single face could destabilize an empire. And in that silence, the clink of a mask being fastened, the scratch of a quill signing false death records, we hear the real lesson. Sometimes history's greatest secrets aren't just lost. They're deliberately erased. The blueprint for the atomic bomb, America's most closely guarded secret, wasn't just stolen. It was handed to the Soviets by someone standing in the room where it was designed. While names like Julius Rosenberg and Klaus Fuchs are infamous for leaking nuclear secrets, historians agree there was at least one more spy still unidentified who slipped through the cracks of history. This phantom operative didn't just pass notes, they had unrestricted access to the heart of the Manhattan Project, and their betrayal might have reshaped the Cold War before it even began. The clues are etched into declassified documents. Soviet cables decrypted by the Venona project reference an agent code named Quantum, described as a high-value scientific asset with direct ties to Los Alamos. Unlike Fuchs, who provided theoretical calculations, Quantum's intel included precise engineering specs, details so accurate, Soviet scientists later admitted they cut years off their bomb's development. Whoever they weren't just an informant, they were an insider. Suspicion narrows to a handful of candidates. One compelling lead points to Russell McNutt, an engineer who worked on the bomb's explosive lens system. His sudden resignation in 1946 raised eyebrows, especially after files revealed he'd been repeatedly vetted for suspicious contacts, yet no charges were ever filed. Another enigma is Frederick Rienese, a future Nobel laureate who mysteriously traveled to Europe post-war, a trip coinciding with known Soviet intelligence operations. Both men had motive and opportunity, but concrete evidence remains locked in archives still classified today. The most chilling possibility that Quantum wasn't a scientist at all, but a security officer. Files from the KGB's successor agency mention an agent embedded in counterintelligence, someone who could manipulate clearance protocols to shield other moles. If true, this wasn't just espionage, it was a Trojan horse allowing the Soviets to cherry-pick America's most devastating secrets. Why does this case still matter? Because the stakes were unimaginable. Quantum's leaks didn't just accelerate Stalin's bomb, they tipped the scales of nuclear parity, and somewhere buried in a Moscow vault or a dusty U.S. records warehouse lies the answer to history's most pressing question: who sold the atom bomb and how did they vanish without a trace? The night of September 18, 1961, should have been routine, a short flight from Leopoldville to Ndola, clear skies ahead. Instead, it became one of the Cold War's darkest riddles. UN Secretary-General Dag Hammarskjöld boarded that DC-6 plane with a singular mission: to broker peace in the Congo's bloody civil war. By midnight, the wreckage was scattered across a hillside in northern Rhodesia, his body found gripping a playing card, the ace of spades. Coincidence? Or a killer's calling card? Hammarskjöld was no ordinary diplomat. He'd spent years navigating the Cold War's minefield, infuriating both Washington and Moscow by refusing to let the UN become a puppet of either superpower. His final act, negotiating with Congo's secessionist leader Moise Tshom, threatened to upend the covert scramble for Africa's mineral wealth. Western mining interests, Soviet-backed rebels, and even rogue intelligence factions all had motives to silence him. Yet the official inquiry blamed pilot error, citing an ill-timed descent. The evidence, though, tells a different story. Witnesses near the crash site reported seeing a second plane, a smaller aircraft, firing flares or bullets moments before impact. A radio operator's log, suppressed for decades, recorded Hammarskjöld's pilot urgently asking about unidentified aircraft. Even more damning, British soldiers stationed nearby reached the wreckage within hours, but their testimonies vanished from official records. By morning, sensitive documents Hammarskjöld carried were missing, and the crash scene showed signs of tampering. Declassified files add layers to the conspiracy. A 1975 CIA memo admitted the crash may have been facilitated by hostile action. Belgian mercenaries hired by mining conglomerates were overheard bragging about taking out the Swede. Meanwhile, Soviet cables celebrated his death as fortuitous, though no direct link to the crash was proven. The truth might lie in the unlikeliest of places. In 2019, a UN panel reviewed new forensic evidence, burn patterns consistent with an external explosion, and a bullet hole in Hammarskjöld's skull that didn't match crash trauma. The panel concluded there was persuasive evidence of an attack, yet key questions remain unanswered. Who stood to gain most from his death, and why, 6 decades later, do intelligence agencies still block access to critical files? Hammarskjöld's legacy is a paradox, a man who sought transparency in a world built on shadows. His death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. In the high-stakes game of Cold War espionage, even peacemakers could become targets. And sometimes the wreckage left behind isn't just metal and bone. It's the shattered pieces of truth itself. Her name was a number, her identity a blank space in the ledger of history. Agent 355, the only woman in George Washington's legendary Culper Ring, operated in the shadows of the American Revolution, slipping secrets past British lines with a bravery that defied an empire. Yet, unlike her fellow spies, whose names we know, her true face remains a mystery. Was she a society matron, a merchant's wife, or even a British loyalist playing a dangerous double game? The answer might rewrite our understanding of how America was won. The Culper Ring was Washington's masterpiece of espionage, a web of farmers, merchants, and unlikely heroes who outsmarted British intelligence at every turn. But Agent 355 stood apart. Her gender alone made her an anomaly in an era when women were sidelined from war, yet surviving correspondence hints at her pivotal role. In 1780, she reportedly uncovered Benedict Arnold's treason before his betrayal became public, saving West Point from falling into enemy hands. Later, she's credited with exposing Major John Andre, the British spymaster who facilitated Arnold's defection. Without her, the revolution might have collapsed before Yorktown. But who was she? Historians have chased shadows for centuries. One theory points to Anna Strong, a Long Island socialite who hung petticoats on her clothesline to signal drop points, a primitive but effective code. Others argue for Robert Townsend's sister, Sarah, whose letters contain veiled references to troop movements. Then there's the most tantalizing lead, a woman known only as Mary in British captivity records, arrested for suspicious correspondence but released without trial, suggesting someone powerful protected her. The intrigue deepens with whispers from British diaries. A frustrated officer wrote of a lady of rank who knew too much, while another lamented how rebel spies hid behind skirts. Was 355 leveraging societal expectations to move undetected? In a world where women were dismissed as harmless, she may have been the perfect weapon, invisible precisely because no one thought to look. What makes her story endure isn't just the mystery, it's the quiet revolution she represents. While history remembers the founding fathers, Agent 355 embodies the unsung thousands women, enslaved people, ordinary citizens who risked everything for a cause that might not even recognize them. Her anonymity wasn't an accident. It was the price of doing business in a world that wasn't ready to admit how much it owed to a woman. And somewhere, buried in a diary or a faded ledger, the truth still waits proof that the revolution's greatest spy might have been hiding in plain sight all along. The sky above the California coast was clear on the morning of August 16, 1942, perfect conditions for a routine patrol. The U.S. Navy blimp L-8 lifted off from Treasure Island with a two-man crew, tasked with scanning the Pacific for enemy submarines. But when it drifted back to Earth hours later, its gondola door gaping open and the crew nowhere to be found, it became one of World War II's most bizarre unsolved mysteries. How does a military airship equipped with life rafts, parachutes, and no signs of struggle lose both pilots mid-flight without a trace? The facts only deepen the enigma. The L-8's last radio transmission reported suspicious oil slicks, suggesting a possible submarine sighting. Yet when the blimp was recovered, its engines were still idling, the fuel tanks half full. The crew's personal effects, wallets, cigarettes, even a thermos of still warm coffee sat undisturbed. It was as if Lieutenant Ernest Cody and Ensign Charles Adams had simply stepped out mid-air. Navy investigators closed the case as an accidental fall, but the explanation rang hollow. No bodies were ever recovered despite intensive searches along the flight path. And why would both men abandon a fully functional aircraft without deploying a single life raft? Conspiracy theories erupted almost immediately. Some whispered of a top-secret experiment gone wrong, perhaps testing radar jamming technology that malfunctioned, forcing the crew to bail out. Others pointed to the blimp's proximity to the Manhattan Project's Berkeley lab, suggesting classified materials might have been on board, but the most chilling theory involves espionage. Declassified files reveal that the L-8's patrol route intersected with known Japanese submarine activity that day. Could the crew have been captured after spotting an enemy vessel? One fisherman later claimed to see a parachute descending toward a dark object in the water, a detail the Navy dismissed, yet Japanese records after the war confirmed submarines were operating covertly off California. The official cover-up remains as puzzling as the disappearance itself. Navy personnel were ordered to sign non-disclosure agreements, and the blimp was quickly repurposed for training, effectively erasing evidence. Even the original incident report is riddled with redactions. Perhaps the truth lies in a deceptively simple detail: the blimp's nickname, the Flying Dutchman, borrowed from the legend of a ghost ship doomed to wander eternally. Fitting then that the L8 itself became a phantom, a silent witness to secrets that may never float to the surface. The uranium cubes were small, each one a dense, unremarkable block about the size of a coffee mug. But in the final days of World War II, these unassuming objects became the most sought-after prizes in the race to control nuclear technology. Nazi Germany's atomic program, though far behind the Manhattan Project, had amassed hundreds of these cubes for their experimental reactors. And when Allied forces stormed through Germany in 1945, they expected to seize them all, yet somehow over half vanished without a trace. Where did they go, and who was quietly rewriting the rules of the Cold War before it even began? The hunt for the missing uranium reads like a thriller. Scientists working under Werner Heisenberg, Germany's top nuclear physicist, had hidden their research in caves, barns, and even a beer cellar. When American troops located the main cache at Hagelock Castle, they recovered 659 cubes, but intelligence reports suggested there should have been over 1,200. The discrepancy sparked immediate alarm. Soviet teams were combing the same territory, and the fear of Stalin's regime acquiring Nazi nuclear secrets sent Allied agents into overdrive. Yet despite interrogations, raids, and even offers of amnesty to former Nazi scientists, the trail went cold. One theory points to Operation Paperclip, the secret US program that smuggled German scientists out of Europe. Documents declassified in the 1990s reveal that some of these scientists, particularly those with knowledge of uranium enrichment, had their backgrounds sanitized. Were the missing cubes part of their unspoken bargaining chips? Another lead vanishes into the shadows of post-war smuggling networks. Black market dealers in Switzerland and Argentina were rumored to traffic in scientific materials, and a 1947 memo from the Atomic Energy Commission warns of uranium samples appearing in Buenos Aires. But the most explosive possibility involves a deliberate blind eye. Some historians argue Allied intelligence knew where the uranium was going and let it happen. With the Cold War brewing, certain factions may have seen value in letting the Soviets acquire just enough material to feel confident, but not enough to leap ahead. It's a chilling thought that the very objects meant to fuel Hitler's atomic dreams could have been used as pawns in a much larger game. Today, a handful of these cubes sit in museums, their surfaces still etched with the serial numbers assigned by Nazi scientists. The rest, they're out there somewhere, perhaps repurposed, perhaps still hidden, their radioactive signatures fading into the silence of history. And in that silence lies a question: if even something as traceable as uranium can disappear, what else slipped through the cracks when the world was too busy counting its victories? It began with a single image, a cryptic post on an internet forum in January 2012. A stark black background, white text, and a signature that would soon haunt the online world: hello. We are looking for highly intelligent individuals. To find them, we have devised a test. Signed, Cicada 3031. What followed wasn't just an internet puzzle. It was a labyrinth of codes, ciphers, and hidden messages so sophisticated, it mirrored the tradecraft of actual intelligence agencies. And when the trail led from public forums to encrypted servers, from ancient philosophy to cutting-edge cryptography, one question became unavoidable. Was this an elaborate game or a covert recruiting ground for the next generation of spies? The first Cicada challenge unfolded like a digital scavenger hunt. Solvers had to decode layers of steganography messages hidden within images using techniques straight out of Cold War spy manuals. Some steps required knowledge of medieval runes or 19th century literary ciphers. Others demanded fluency in programming languages so obscure, only a handful of experts worldwide could crack them. The few who reached the final stages reported receiving personal emails from Cicada, directing them to physical drop points where USB drives were left in designated locations across the globe. One recipient, a mathematician from Norway, described the experience as less like solving a puzzle and more like being vetted for a black ops unit. Connections to intelligence work are hard to ignore. The puzzle's complexity aligns eerily with known recruitment tactics used by agencies like the NSA or GCHQ, both of which run annual code-breaking challenges to spot talent. Even more telling, Cicada's messages occasionally referenced real-world espionage history, including direct nods to the Zimmerman telegram and the Enigma machine. Then there's the timing. The first Cicada puzzle appeared just months after Julian Assange's WikiLeaks dump exposed classified U.S. diplomatic cables, an event that sent intelligence agencies scrambling to tighten cybersecurity and recruit fresh cryptographers. But the real smoking gun might lie in what happened to the winners. Those who completed the challenges were allegedly invited to private online forums, where discussions ranged from libertarian philosophy to advanced encryption methods. A handful claimed to have been offered employment opportunities with unnamed organizations, while others vanished from online communities entirely. One participant, posting under a pseudonym, later resurfaced with an odd detail. Their Cicada correspondence included a PGP encryption key matching one used in a leaked NSA internal document. The agency denied any involvement, but the coincidence was striking. Skeptics argue Cicada was merely an ARG, an alternate reality game gone viral. Yet the puzzle's sophistication suggests resources far beyond typical hobbyists. The steganography alone would require computational power and cryptographic knowledge more common in state-sponsored labs than basement hacker collectives. And then there's the silence. After 3 major puzzle cycles between 2012 and 2014, Cicada vanished as abruptly as it appeared. No farewell, no closure, just a void where a digital enigma once thrived. Perhaps the most compelling clue is the one left unsolved. The final Cicada message included a cipher that remains unbroken to this day. Its solution might reveal whether this was all an intellectual exercise or the 21st century's most ingenious spy recruitment scheme, hiding in plain sight on the very forums where anyone, from curious teenagers to seasoned cryptographers, could take the bait. In the world of espionage, the best secrets aren't always stolen. Sometimes they're waiting to be found by those smart enough or reckless enough to go looking. The Red Orchestra wasn't just a spy network, it was a symphony of betrayal playing out in the shadows of Nazi Germany, where every note could mean life or death. Soviet operatives embedded themselves so deeply within the Third Reich's infrastructure, they tapped into Hitler's inner circle, relaying battle plans, troop movements, and even industrial secrets straight to Moscow. Yet by 1942, nearly the entire network lay shattered. The Gestapo rolled them up with chilling precision, executing over 50 agents. One question lingers: who handed them the knife? At the heart of the mystery stands Harro Scholz-Boysen, the aristocratic Luftwaffe officer who led the Berlin branch, and Arvid Harnack, an economist with ties to the German High Command. Together, they recruited scientists, journalists, even a Broadway actress named Mildred Harnack, threading their influence through Berlin's elite. Their intelligence was so vital, Stalin reportedly delayed the evacuation of Stalingrad based on their warnings of Hitler's strategy. But in August 1942, the Gestapo struck, decoding Soviet radio traffic in an operation they called Rote Kapelle Red Orchestra. The official story pins the collapse on sloppy tradecraft, radio operators transmitting too long, enabling triangulation. Yet declassified files reveal inconsistencies. One theory points to a mole within Soviet intelligence itself. NKVD archives mention an informant code-named Brezina, described as a disgruntled handler leaking names to the Obueya. Another suspect is Wilhelm Vogt, the Gestapo signals expert, who allegedly cracked their ciphers not through technical brilliance but with a stolen codebook, one that may have been deliberately left vulnerable. The darkest possibility that Stalin himself sacrificed them. Some historians argue the Kremlin grew wary of the orchestra's ideological diversity. Harnack's circle included socialists, not just Stalinists. Letting the Nazis prune the network would have eliminated dissent while preserving plausible deniability, but the truth might lie in the silence of the dead. Among the last messages intercepted was a frantic warning from Scholz-Boyson: "We are blown, find the traitor," the signal cut off mid-transmission. Decades later, a Stasi file surfaced with a cryptic annotation. An unnamed Weimar communist recruited by the Gestapo in 1939 had infiltrated the group. The name was redacted. What makes the Red Orchestra's fate so haunting isn't just the betrayal, it's the legacy. These were spies who believed they could outmaneuver fascism from within, only to discover the darkest truth of espionage. Sometimes the enemy isn't just across the wire. They're sitting beside you, smiling as the music stops. The skies over Scotland were still dark in the early hours of May 10, 1941, when a lone Messerschmitt fighter plane spiraled out of control and crash-landed in a farmer's field. The pilot, disoriented and with a broken ankle, identified himself with a name that sent shockwaves through British intelligence: Rudolf Hess, the deputy Führer of Nazi Germany. What followed wasn't just a bizarre wartime incident, it was a riddle wrapped in deception, one that historians still can't fully unravel. Was this a rogue piece overture? A botched coup, or had British spies orchestrated the entire thing to fracture the Third Reich from within? Hess's motives remain the first enigma. By 1941, he'd been sidelined within Hitler's inner circle, his influence waning as the war escalated. Some argue he flew to Scotland to negotiate peace with Britain, believing he could exploit aristocratic contacts like the Duke of Hamilton, an old acquaintance from the 1936 Berlin Olympics, to broker a separate truce. Declassified MI5 files reveal Hess carried peace proposals, including terms that would have let Britain keep its empire if it joined Germany against the Soviets. But why would Hitler's right-hand man act alone? Hess's mental state fuels speculation. Associates noted his growing obsession with astrology and fringe theories, and a 1943 OSS profile described him as a man chasing redemption through delusion. Then there's the counter-theory that Hess was lured into a trap. British intelligence had been intercepting coded messages between Hess and his apocalyptic advisor, Karl Horshofer, for months. Some historians allege MI6 fed Hess false astrological predictions suggesting a pro-German faction waited in Britain. Even the flight path is suspicious. Hess, an experienced pilot, inexplicably bailed out instead of landing at the nearby airfield he'd mentioned in letters. Was he forced down? A 1992 KGB leak added fuel to the fire. A memo claiming Soviet spies in London knew of the flight in advance, hinting at British foreknowledge. The darkest possibility that Hitler authorized the mission as a feint. Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels privately called Hess's flight a madness we must spin to our advantage. If the peace offer failed, it could demoralize British resistance. If successful, it might buy time before the planned invasion of the USSR. But Hitler's furious denunciation of Hess as a traitor suggests genuine shock or masterful theatrics. Hess's post-war fate deepens the intrigue. At the Nuremberg trials, he feigned amnesia, dodging execution but remaining Spandau prison's sole inmate until his alleged suicide in 1987. Conspiracy theorists point to the oddities: the prison's Soviet guards, the missing autopsy photos, the fact that Hess, a frail 83-year-old, somewhatedly hanged himself with an electrical cord. Was he silenced to bury what he knew? The truth may lie in the contradictions. Hess was both a zealot and a pawn, a man whose flight symbolized the chaotic undercurrents of a war where no player moved without hidden motives. In the end, his story isn't just about one man's madness. It's about the shadows where diplomacy, espionage, and desperation collide, a place where history rarely leaves clear answers. Buried beneath layers of ink and legend, the Beale ciphers aren't just a treasure hunter's obsession, they're a ghostly echo of the Civil War's Shadow War, where gold and coded messages could change the fate of a nation. In 1820, a Virginia innkeeper named Robert Morris received a locked box from a mysterious guest named Thomas Beale. Inside were 3 pages of numbers, allegedly pointing to a fortune in gold and silver worth millions today. But here's the twist: only one cipher has ever been cracked, revealing the treasure's location somewhere in Bedford County. The other 2, they've defied cryptographers for over 2 centuries. So why does this feel less like a treasure map and more like a spy's dead drop? The timing is suspiciously perfect. Beale's ciphers surfaced just decades before the Civil War, when Confederate operatives were scrambling to fund their rebellion. Secret ledgers from the Confederacy's Treasury Department mention unconventional reserves, and rumors swirled of gold shipments hidden in Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains. Could the Beale hoard have been part of that shadow economy? One theory points to John Wilkes Booth, not just an assassin but a Confederate courier who frequented the same Virginia backroads where Beale's treasure supposedly lies. Booth's diary, recovered after his death, contained odd numerical jottings that some researchers swear resemble the cipher's structure, but the espionage angle runs deeper. The Unsolved Beale cipher used the Declaration of Independence as a key, a technique identical to codes employed by Union and Confederate spies. A captured Confederate agent's notebook from 1863 detailed a nearly identical cipher system, suggesting the Beale papers might have been a prototype for wartime communication. Even stranger, the unsolved ciphers align with known Confederate encryption methods that relied on double-layered numbering, a tactic used to baffle Union codebreakers. The most tantalizing clue lies in a name: Colonel John Mosby, the Confederacy's Gray Ghost, who specialized in guerrilla raids and hiding loot. Mosby's men reportedly buried Union gold in Virginia, and post-war letters from his officers referenced Beale's method for securing caches. Was the treasure real, or was the whole story a smokescreen, a way to obscure Confederate gold that spies moved undercover? Modern codebreakers hit the same wall as their 19th-century counterparts. The unbroken ciphers resist supercomputers, leading some to speculate they're unbreakable by design, meant to be solved only by someone holding a lost key, perhaps a specific edition of a book or a whispered phrase. That's textbook spycraft, a secret kept not by complexity but by silence. So do the Beale ciphers guard a fortune, or a secret too explosive to reveal? In a war where spies smuggled gold in coffin linings and messages in quilt patterns, the line between legend and history blurs, and somewhere in those unsolved numbers, the truth may still be waiting, not just for a treasure hunter's luck, but for a cryptographer who can read between the lines of a nation's hidden war. For years, she haunted crime scenes across Germany like a specter, her presence confirmed only by traces of DNA, but her identity a maddening blank. Dubbed the Phantom of Heilbronn, this unknown woman was linked to 6 murders and nearly 40 other crimes between 1993 and 2009, from burglaries to a brutal killing of a police officer. The twist: she didn't exist. The case began routinely enough. In 2001, investigators swabbed the rim of a teacup at a break-in near Heilbronn, recovering a female DNA profile. Over the next 8 years, that same genetic signature kept reappearing. On a discarded syringe in an unrelated homicide, on the bullet casings of a murdered cop, even on the toy gun used by a young girl kidnapped in Austria. The pattern was chilling. Wherever violence struck, the Phantom's DNA followed. Authorities plastered sketches across Europe, offering rewards, but no witness ever came forward with a credible sighting. Then came the revelation that turned the case from bizarre to borderline absurd. In 2009, forensic analysts made a stunning discovery. the DNA wasn't from a serial killer. It was from a factory worker in Bavaria who packaged cotton swabs. The phantom was contamination, a tragicomic error exposing the fragility of forensic science. But here's where the espionage angle slithers in. 3 of the crimes linked to the phantom bore hallmarks of professional hits. The murdered police officer had been investigating right-wing extremists with ties to Russian oligarchs. The Austrian kidnapping victim's father was a former intelligence consultant. Was someone exploiting the contamination myth to cover their tracks? Former Bindi officers have whispered about false flag DNA, a tactic where intelligence agencies plant genetic material to misdirect investigations. In 2017, leaked emails from a private security firm referenced a Heilbronn-like smokescreen used to obscure a corporate assassination. Coincidence, perhaps, but in a world where spies trade in chaos, the line between accident and strategy blurs. The phantom may have been a lab error, but her legacy is a warning. Even science can be weaponized, and sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones who don't exist at all. Gary Power's U-2 shoot-down over the Soviet Union in 1960 is etched into Cold War lore, but it was far from the only spy plane that vanished into the void. Behind the Iron Curtain, over a dozen reconnaissance aircraft disappeared without explanation, their wreckage hidden, their pilots erased from history. These weren't just crashes, they were deliberate silences swallowed up by a conflict where transparency was the ultimate casualty. Take the case of the RB-47, a modified bomber-turned-spy plane. In April 1955, a crew of 3 took off from Alaska on a routine signals intelligence mission near the Kamchatka Peninsula. Within hours, Soviet MiGS intercepted them. The last radio transmission was frantic, taking fire, attempting evasive, then static. The Pentagon listed them as killed in action, but Soviet archives later told a different story. The plane had crash-landed on a frozen lake. 2 crewmen were captured, interrogated for months, then quietly transferred to a prison camp, the 3rd. His parachute was found shredded in the trees, no body. Declassified memos reveal a harrowing possibility. He might have been taken not by the Soviets, but by a shadowy third party, a group the CIA cryptically referred to in files as the Ice Traders. Then there's the ghost flight of Captain Thomas Maurer. In July 1956, his A-3 Sky Warrior vanished near the Kuril Islands during a classified photo run. For decades, the Navy insisted it was a mechanical failure, until a retired KGB officer admitted in the 1990s that Maurer's plane had been lured off course by a fake distress signal, a tactic known as false beaconing. By the time Maurer realized the trap, Soviet fighters were already locking on. His final act, jettisoning the camera payload into the Sea of Okhotsk, ensuring the film would sink into black water. But here's where it gets eerie. In 2012, a Japanese fishing trawler snagged a piece of wreckage, a control panel with serial numbers matching Maurer's aircraft. The coordinates were over 300 miles from where the Navy had searched. Had the wreck been moved, the most disturbing disappearances involved not just metal and men, but secrets too volatile to risk exposure. In October 1962, at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, a U-2 pilot named Charles Maltzby strayed into Soviet airspace near the Chukotka Peninsula. His mission: sample atmospheric radiation from Soviet nuclear tests. For 90 terrifying minutes, Maltzby dodged MiGS in pitch darkness, his instruments frozen by Arctic temperatures. He barely made it back to Alaska, but declassified documents reveal a chilling detail. Another U-2, call sign Dark Star, wasn't so lucky. Launched hours after Maltzby's near disaster, it vanished near the same airspace. The Pentagon's explanation: navigational error. Yet Soviet air defense logs mention no intercept, no wreckage recovered, just nothing. What were these planes really carrying? Some researchers point to Operation Blue Moon, a little-known program testing anti-radar coatings later used on stealth aircraft. others whisper about suitcase nukes, miniaturized atomic devices designed to be deployed behind enemy lines if war broke out. The truth might lie in the gaps between official stories, where missing flight recorders and redacted manifests hint at payloads too sensitive to acknowledge. One thing is certain, in the shadow war of aerial espionage, every disappearance was a message, a reminder that in the Cold War's darkest hours, some truths were buried so deep, even the sky couldn't hold them. The fire spread through the archives like a purge, consuming not just paper but history itself. In the chaotic months following the Russian Revolution, as the Bolsheviks tightened their grip on power, a systematic erasure began, one targeting the intelligence networks of the fallen Romanov dynasty. Files detailing decades of imperial espionage were torched, shredded, or simply vanished into the smoke of revolution. But what secrets were so dangerous that even the revolutionaries who claimed to despise the old regime's lies couldn't risk them surviving? The scale of the destruction was staggering. Imperial Russia's spy apparatus stretched from the opium dens of Shanghai to the salons of Paris, with agents embedded in foreign governments, anarchist circles, even royal courts. Yet today, entire sections of the Okhrana's records, the Tsar's secret police, exist only as footnotes in declassified memos. A 1922 inventory of seized documents lists over 10,000 dossiers as destroyed by order of the Cheka, the Bolsheviks' newly formed security force. But whispers persisted. Former Okhrana officers who fled to Europe spoke of a hidden archive smuggled out by loyalists in the final days of the monarchy. One defector, a cipher clerk named Vasily Orlov, claimed to have helped bury crates of encrypted files beneath a church in Riga. When investigators searched in the 1930s, the church had been leveled by unknown explosives. The gaps in the record aren't just missing pages, they're black holes where history warps. Take the case of Evno Azov, the revolutionary-turned-double agent who infiltrated Lenin's inner circle while secretly working for the Tsar. Official accounts say Azov was exposed in 1908, but Okhrana fragments suggest he wasn't the only mole. A single surviving cable, dated January 1917, references an agent code named Veres still active among the Bolsheviks. Was there a traitor at the heart of the revolution? The answer might have been in the files burned that spring. Even more explosive are the hints of Romanov ties to foreign intelligence. British MI5 archives contain cryptic references to a Petersburg Protocol, allegedly a pre-war agreement to share counterterrorism tactics between the Okhrana and Scotland Yard. If true, it would rewrite our understanding of how deeply European powers collaborated to suppress dissent before 1914. Then there's the mystery of Agent Aurora, a name that surfaces in French diplomatic correspondence as a high-placed Russian source inside the Kaiser's Germany. Some historians believe this could have been Mathilda Kashusynskaya, the famed ballerina and Nicholas II's former lover, whose connections to Berlin's elite were never fully explained. The greatest loss, though, may be the personal stories. Among the ash piles were files on the Okhrana's women, a network of female operatives who used societal invisibility as their greatest weapon. These were not just seductresses, as popular myth suggests, but translators, salon hostesses, even doctors who smuggled microfilm in medical supplies. One such agent, Maria Kovalenskaya, posed as a journalist to infiltrate revolutionary cells in Geneva. Her reports, if they still existed, could have revealed early Bolshevik plans for the revolution. Instead, all that remains is a single interrogation transcript from 1918 where a Cheka officer snaps at her, "Your files burned with the rest." Now you burn too. Why does this matter now? Because every missing document is a thread pulled from the tapestry of history. Without the Okhrana's records, we'll never know how close the Tsar came to crushing the revolution before it began, or how many of his enemies were secretly his own spies. The Romanov files weren't just memory. They were a mirror, one the new regime shattered rather than let the world see its reflection. Her voice crackled through the static of shortwave radios across the Pacific, a siren song of doubt aimed straight at the hearts of American GIs. "Hello, boys," she'd purr before listing Allied defeats, playing sentimental songs and asking, "Isn't your wife lonely without you?" To thousands of homesick soldiers, she was Tokyo Rose, the mythical villainess of Japanese propaganda. But behind the legend lies a far more complex truth, the story of a woman caught between empires whose real crime may have been simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The name Tokyo Rose wasn't a single person, but an umbrella term for approximately 12 English-speaking female broadcasters employed by Japan's NHK radio. Yet only one would be branded with the title forever: Iva Toguri, an American citizen stranded in Japan when Pearl Harbor erupted. Forced to renounce her US citizenship and work at Radio Tokyo to survive, she became Orphan Anne on the show 0 Hour, reading scripts penned by Allied POWs under duress. Her broadcasts were far tamer than the myth suggests, no military secrets, just sardonic banter between records. But wartime hysteria transformed her into a treasonous witch in the public imagination. The real espionage mystery isn't whether Toguri was a spy, she wasn't, but who crafted the Tokyo Rose myth itself. Declassified OSS files reveal Allied intelligence knew the truth as early as 1943. One memo admits the broadcasts had negligible tactical value, while another notes Japanese producers considered firing Toguri for her lackluster delivery. So why was she prosecuted? The answer lies in post-war politics. When journalists hunted for the real Tokyo Rose in 1945, Toguri, desperate to return home, admitted the moniker for a cash interview. That mistake made her the perfect scapegoat for a nation hungry for wartime villains. The trial was a farce. Key witnesses later admitted to perjury, and prosecutors withheld evidence proving scripts were written by POWs. Even the jury foreman confessed they convicted her because someone had to pay. Yet the most chilling detail emerged decades later. A 1948 CIA report concluding Toguri was low-level and non-ideological, with annotations suggesting her prosecution was greenlit to distract from another scandal: the US government's quiet repatriation of actual Japanese war criminals in exchange for biological warfare research. Toguri's eventual pardon in 1977 couldn't undo the damage. Her case remains a warning about how easily propaganda transcends war, morphing into something neither side fully controls. The true Tokyo Rose wasn't a spy or a traitor. She was something far more dangerous to those in power, an inconvenient truth, proof that sometimes the loudest voices in war aren't the ones pulling the strings. William Morgan's story reads like a spy thriller that bled into real life, then ended with a bullet. An American mercenary turned revolutionary, he fought alongside Castro's rebels in the Cuban Revolution, only to turn against them in a twist so dramatic it cost him everything. His body was found in a ditch outside Havana in 1960, hands bound, 2 gunshots to the head. Officially, it was a summary execution by the new communist regime. But the truth, it's tangled in a web of Cold War betrayals, unanswered questions, and the lingering suspicion that Morgan wasn't just a casualty of revolution, he was a man who knew too much. Morgan was no ordinary soldier of fortune. By 1957, he'd gone from Ohio petty criminal to a key figure in Castro's guerrilla army, leading a rebel faction in Cuba's Escambray Mountains. His bravery earned him the rank of comandante, a rarity for a foreigner. But as Castro's communist leanings became clear, Morgan, a staunch anti-communist, began secretly working with US intelligence. Declassified CIA files confirm he funneled information to American handlers while simultaneously playing a dangerous double game, pretending loyalty to Havana. The breaking point came when he exposed a Soviet-backed plot to smuggle arms to pro-communist rebels in Latin America. That's when the clock started ticking. The night of his arrest, Morgan was lured to a meeting with Cuban security forces under false pretenses. Witnesses later claimed they heard him shouting in English, "This is a setup." Within hours, he was dead. Castro's government branded him a traitor, but the execution was suspiciously rushed. No trial, no public evidence, even stranger. The murder weapon was never recovered, and the autopsy report vanished from Cuban archives. Former CIA operatives have hinted that Morgan was eliminated not for treason, but because he could have exposed other American assets still embedded in Cuba. A 1993 memo unearthed by researchers references an asset compromised by loose ends, with Morgan's name handwritten in the margin. Then there's the exile angle. Morgan had been secretly aiding anti-Castro militants, including members of what would later become the Bay of Pigs invasion force. Some historians believe hardline exiles, fearing Morgan might reveal their plans under torture, pressured Havana to silence him permanently. A deathbed confession from a Cuban intelligence officer in 2007 added fuel to the fire. He claimed Morgan's execution order came from the North, suggesting U.S. factions who saw him as a liability. The darkest theory involves Operation 40, a CIA-backed squad tasked with eliminating problematic figures post-revolution. Declassified documents place several of its members in Havana around Morgan's death. One, a mercenary named Frank Sturgis, later infamous for Watergate, bragged in private about tying up loose ends in Cuba. Was Morgan deemed too volatile, too unpredictable to keep alive? His widow, a Cuban revolutionary named Olga Rodriguez, spent decades demanding justice. She insisted until her death that Morgan was killed not for betraying Cuba, but for refusing to betray America. Today, his grave remains unmarked, his story a footnote in Cold War history. But in the annals of unsolved espionage killings, William Morgan's murder stands apart, a crime where every possible culprit had a motive, and the truth may have been buried deeper than the body. They called themselves the Ghost Army, but their illusions were anything but spectral, each deception crafted with meticulous precision, each ruse so convincing it saved thousands of lives without firing a single shot. Officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, this elite World War II unit comprised artists, engineers, and radio operators who weaponized imagination against the Nazis, staging fake tank battalions with inflatable rubber tanks, broadcasting phantom troop movements through spoofed radio transmissions, and even impersonating generals to mislead enemy spies. Yet after the war, their exploits were classified for decades, their members scattered into obscurity, some vanishing so completely it raises a haunting question. Were these masters of deception still playing their roles long after V-Day? The unit's greatest trick might have been erasing itself. Unlike traditional soldiers, Ghost Army operatives were forbidden from discussing their missions, even with family. Declassified files reveal why. Their techniques were so effective, the US military reused them in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, but the silence came at a cost. Many veterans died before their contributions were acknowledged in 2022, when Congress finally awarded them the Congressional Gold Medal. Others simply disappeared, not just from public record, but from existence itself. Take Corporal Robert Dahl, a sound engineer who mimicked entire armored divisions using custom-recorded tank noises. After the war, he boarded a train to Washington for debriefing in 1945 and was never seen again. Army records list him as discharged, yet no discharge papers exist. A fellow Ghost Army veteran later claimed Dahl had been recruited for something colder, a phrase that takes on new meaning when paired with a 1951 CIA memo requesting audio specialists with field experience in perceptual manipulation. Then there's the curious case of the unit's artists, men like Bill Blass, who became a fashion icon, and Ellsworth Kelly, who revolutionized modern art. Their post-war success seems unconnected until you examine the timing. Blass's sudden rise in the late 1940s coincided with whispers of a CIA program using fashion shows as cover for European intelligence drops. Kelly's abstract compositions, meanwhile, bear an uncanny resemblance to visual distortion techniques described in Ghost Army camouflage manuals. Were these careers mere coincidence or the perfect cover for continuing their craft in the shadows? The most compelling evidence of lingering operations lies in the unit's radio operators. Signals intelligence documents from the early Cold War reference false flag broadcasts, mimicking Soviet transmissions, a tactic identical to Ghost Army operations. One 1956 NSA file describes a Berlin-based operative known only by the call sign Painter, who allegedly tricked East German forces into revealing troop deployments using fabricated radio chatter. The method identical to the Ghost Army's sonic deception playbook. Why does this matter? Because deception never truly ends. In a world where perception shapes reality, the Ghost Army's greatest legacy might not be the battles they won in World War II, but the invisible war they kept fighting long after the uniforms were put away. Their story blurs the line between soldier and spy, between art and warfare, and for some, perhaps, between coming home and disappearing into the canvas of history. Bletchley Park was the beating heart of Allied code-breaking during World War II, where brilliant minds like Alan Turing cracked the seemingly unbreakable Enigma machine. But beneath its cloak of secrecy, another drama unfolded, one that threatened to unravel the entire operation. For years, historians have puzzled over an unsettling truth. Someone inside those hallowed halls was funneling ultra-intelligence straight to Moscow. The question isn't just who betrayed the Allies' greatest secret, it's why their identity remains shrouded in official silence even now. The first cracks appeared in 1941, when Soviet operatives began referencing Enigma decrypts encoded messages intercepted by British intelligence. These weren't vague allusions, they contained precise details, ship movements, Luftwaffe bombing schedules, that could only have come from Bletchley's inner circle. MI5 launched a frantic mole hunt, but the investigation hit a wall. Suspects were quietly reassigned, files went missing, and by war's end, the trail had gone cold. One name keeps resurfacing: John Cairncross, the Cambridge 5 spy who worked in Bletchley's Hut 3. Declassified documents confirm he passed thousands of documents to the Soviets, including decrypted German communications. But Cairncross himself insisted he wasn't the only leak. In his memoir, he cryptically referenced those who knew better than to keep receipts, hinting at higher-level complicity. The deeper mystery lies in the cover-up. When Cairncross was finally exposed in the 1950s, his sentencing was bizarrely lenient, a mere reprimand with no prison time. Even stranger, Churchill allegedly intervened to suppress details of the breach, fearing it would undermine trust with America. Was this pragmatism or something darker? Some historians argue the leak wasn't purely treasonous. It may have been tacitly approved by certain factions within British intelligence who saw Stalin as a temporary ally against Hitler. A 1943 memo from MI6 Chief Stuart Menzies references controlled dissemination of ultra material to Moscow, suggesting a calculated gamble to keep the Soviets fighting. Then there's the enigma of the missing file. In 2003, researcher Peter Wright uncovered references to a Bletchley security officer codenamed Orion, described in redacted reports as aware but unactioned. Was Orion a Soviet mole blocking investigations, or a British handler turning a blind eye for strategic reasons? The file containing the answer was pulled from the National Archives in 1989, under a clause typically reserved for matters of royal privacy. What makes this case endure isn't just the betrayal. It's the lingering sense that some secrets were allowed to slip through the cracks, that in the fog of war, even the guardians of truth sometimes played both sides. The real scandal might not be that Bletchley was compromised, but that certain powers decided it was worth the cost. The afternoon of December 5, 1945, should have been routine, a training exercise off the Florida coast for 5 experienced Navy aviators known as Flight 19. But when their compasses malfunctioned mid-flight and their leader radioed, "We can't be sure of any direction, even the ocean doesn't look as it should," they vanished into legend. The official explanation blamed pilot error and fuel exhaustion, but classified documents suggest something far stranger was at play. What if Flight 19 wasn't just lost, but deliberately led astray by technology no one was supposed to know existed? At first glance, the disappearance seems like a tragic accident. The squadron's commander, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, reportedly became disoriented after his compass failed, insisting they were over the Gulf of Mexico when they were actually deep in the Atlantic. Rescue planes launched to find them, including a PBM Mariner flying boat, which itself disappeared without a trace. The Navy's final report pointed to causes or reasons unknown, a rare admission of helplessness. Yet declassified post-war files reveal unsettling context. That same month, the military had been testing experimental navigational jammers designed to confuse enemy radar technology so secret, even most pilots were unaware of it. A formerly classified memo from the Naval Research Laboratory mentions anomalous compass deviations during tests near the Bahamas, with handwritten notes speculating about unintended field effects. The Cold War angle deepens the mystery. Just weeks before Flight 19's disappearance, Soviet ships were detected mapping underwater currents near the Bahamas, possibly probing for submerged listening posts. One declassified CIA memo from 1946 references a possible electronic countermeasures incident in the Bermuda Triangle, noting that recovered Soviet signals intelligence from that period contained unusually precise coordinates of U.S. naval exercises. Was Flight 19 caught in an invisible battle of early electronic warfare? Some researchers point to the PBM Mariner's sudden loss as evidence. These flying boats were notorious for gasoline fumes that could trigger explosions, but witnesses reported seeing a midair fireball with no debris field, consistent with an energy weapon test gone wrong. The most haunting theory involves Project Seahorse, a little-known Navy program experimenting with magnetic anomaly detection technology that could disrupt compasses at long range. Flight 19's last transmissions described the sea looking wrong, with one pilot frantically reporting white water beneath them despite calm weather that day. Modern oceanographers suggest this could align with the effects of powerful underwater electromagnetics, which can create swirling, pale disturbances in shallow seas. If Seahorse was being tested covertly and Soviet spy ships were nearby to observe, the military would have every reason to bury the truth. Decades later, the wreckage of Flight 19's Avengers was never conclusively found despite multiple searches. A few scattered planes discovered off Florida's coast lacked serial number matches, deepening the enigma. The real secret of Flight 19 might not be where they went, but what they stumbled upon, a glimpse of a hidden war already simmering beneath the surface of peacetime, where technology outpaced ethics and pilots could vanish without a trace, sacrificed to the silence of the Cold War's opening moves. For decades, the highest levels of British intelligence harbored a ghost, a mole so deeply embedded. His betrayal only came to light when the Soviet Union itself collapsed. Codenamed Dieter in KGB files, this mystery operative allegedly passed secrets to Moscow from the 1950s through the 1980s, compromising some of the West's most sensitive Cold War operations. Yet, unlike the infamous Cambridge Five, his true identity remains locked in classified archives and whispered speculation. Was he a disillusioned idealist, a master manipulator, or something far more unsettling, a traitor who thrived not because he was invisible, but because no one dared to suspect a man at the very heart of MI6? The first hints emerged from a cache of Soviet intelligence files smuggled out of Moscow in the early 1990s. Among stacks of decrypted cables, researchers found meticulous records of a British source described as our crown jewel, an agent supplying everything from NATO contingency plans to the identities of undercover operatives. One 1973 memo boasted that Dieter's information allowed us to anticipate and neutralize 70% of British counterintelligence actions. Yet the files scrupulously avoided any detail that could identify him, referring only to his access, privilege to weekly Joint Intelligence Committee briefings, a clearance level reserved for perhaps 24 officials at any given time. Rumors immediately swirled around Sir Maurice Oldfield, MI6's former chief, whose name had been quietly scrubbed from certain Cold War histories due to security concerns. Oldfield's wartime service in Soviet infiltrated Vienna, and his sudden resignation in 1978 fueled speculation. Yet declassified assessments from MI5's own mole hunt, Operation Fluency, later exonerated him, leaving investigators with a far more disturbing conclusion. If not Oldfield, the mole was likely someone still considered beyond reproach, possibly even knighted for services to the crown. The trail grows hotter when cross-referencing compromised operations. In 1961, a British plan to extract a defecting Soviet scientist was blown weeks in advance. In 1976, every MI6 asset in East Germany was rolled up within days of recruitment. Each disaster shared one eerie commonality: only senior staff with need-to-know clearance were briefed. One retired MI6 officer, speaking anonymously in a 2012 documentary, recalled a 1982 incident where a Moscow-bound courier, carrying documents seen by just 3 people, was ambushed within hours of departure. "We started calling it the ghost leak," he admitted, "because it felt like someone was reading our memos over our shoulders." The most chilling clue surfaced in a 2017 BBC investigation. While reviewing East German Stasi archives, journalists uncovered a 1985 letter from KGB chief Viktor Chebrikov, gloating that our London friend had just provided the Windsor files, an apparent reference to sensitive royal family security protocols. At the time, only MI6's director and the Queen's private secretary held that information. If the claim was true, the mole wasn't just high-ranking. He was operating at the threshold of the throne itself. So why hasn't Dieter been exposed? The answer may lie in the unspoken rules of espionage. Unlike ideological traitors like Kim Philby, a pragmatist spy trading secrets for money or blackmail could be turned into a double agent or silently retired to avoid scandal. Former CIA officer Tenant Bagley, who handled Soviet defectors, once noted that the darkest secrets aren't the ones spies steal, but the ones their own agencies bury to save face. With most key players now dead and MI6's archives sealed until at least 2060, the truth about Dieter may remain where it's always been, hiding in plain sight, masked by the very institution he betrayed. Standing outside CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, the crypto's sculpture isn't just a work of art. It's a riddle wrapped in copper and coded in plain sight. Created by artist Jim Sanborn in 1990, this serpentine masterpiece holds 4 encrypted messages, 3 of which have been solved, but the 4th. It's resisted the world's top cryptographers for over 3 decades, a puzzle so stubborn even the CIA's brightest minds haven't cracked it. What makes this cipher different? And why would an intelligence agency commission a public monument steeped in uncrackable secrets? The first 3 sections of Cryptos read like a crash course in historical cryptography. Sanborn borrowed techniques from everywhere: the Vijna cipher, a Renaissance-era method favored by Confederate spies, and even a twist on the Caesar shift where letters slide down the alphabet. Decrypting these passages revealed poetic fragments, including a reference to the shadow forces and coordinates pointing to a CIA listening post. But Section 4, known as K4, defies every tool in the codebreaker's arsenal. It's only 97 characters long, yet its structure mocks conventional analysis, frequency distribution. The go-to method for cracking substitution ciphers yields gibberish. Even supercomputers running brute force algorithms hit a wall. Sanborn has dropped only 2 clues. The letters nipped in K4 decode to Berlin, and somewhere in the cipher lies the word clock. Beyond that, silence. Theories about K4's purpose range from the practical to the conspiratorial. Some argue it's a recruitment tool, a way for the CIA to quietly identify talent. After all, the first person to solve K3 was a California computer scientist who later joined the agency. Others see darker fingerprints. The sculpture's location, just yards from where the CIA planned Cold War covert ops, raises questions about whether Kryptos hides more than artistic ambition. A declassified memo from 1992 mentions sanitized artist liaison projects aimed at testing non-traditional encryption resilience. Was Kryptos a live exercise, a way to study how outsiders approach an unsolvable puzzle? Then there's the Berlin clue. 1990 was a pivotal year. Germany had just reunified, and the CIA was scrambling to exfiltrate assets from a collapsing East Berlin. Could K4's solution reveal a lost operation, or even the identity of a buried mole? Former CIA cryptographers have admitted off record that the agency maintains a quiet file of proposed solutions, none deemed correct. The most tantalizing hint came from Sanborn himself in 2010, when he revealed that an early draft of Kryptos included a 5th section, one he was advised to remove. By whom, he won't say. What makes Kryptos endure isn't just the mystery, it's the audacity of its existence. In a world where intelligence agencies hoard secrets, here's one they've hung on the lawn, daring anyone to try. The irony is delicious, a code designed to celebrate the act of hiding, displayed where everyone can see. And until someone cracks K4, the sculpture remains the ultimate paradox, a secret in plain sight, whispering to those who know how to listen. From Mata Hari's contested legacy to the spectral mole known only as Dieter, these 25 unsolved cases prove one undeniable truth: espionage isn't just about the secrets that get told, but the ones that never see the light. Each mystery is a fracture in history's mirror, reflecting back not just what we know, but all we might never understand. The vanished uranium cubes, the ghost army's lingering whispers, the cipher on CIA's lawn that still defies decoding. They're more than puzzles. They're reminders that the shadow war never really ends. It just adapts, leaving behind riddles that outlive the spies who made them. Think about the patterns. How often do these cases hinge on missing documents, silenced witnesses, or trails that go cold just as they get interesting? It's no accident. Espionage thrives in the gaps, the places where records burn and memories fade. But here's the thing, every unanswered question is an invitation. Maybe you're the one who'll spot the clue everyone else missed, the overlooked detail in a declassified file, the forgotten diary entry that cracks a century-old code. So what's your theory? Was the Zodiac Killer a rogue operative, or just a madman with a knack for spycraft? Did Agent 355's true identity vanish because history wasn't ready to admit a woman outsmarted the British Empire? Drop your thoughts in the comments. These mysteries belong to all of us now. And if you're hooked on the untold stories lurking behind the official record, hit subscribe. We've barely scratched the surface. From Cold War disappearances to ancient conspiracies, there's always another shadow waiting to be pulled into the light. Because history's greatest spy stories aren't just about the past, they're about the thrill of the hunt and the realization that sometimes the truth isn't lost. It's just hiding in plain sight.